I wasn't supposed to say a word, not during the ceremony, not at the dinner, and certainly not during the toasts. My daughter made that perfectly clear. "We want to keep things simple, Mom," she said with that smile that tells you it's already been decided. So I sat in the third row, not family row, no. That was reserved for his side. I was seated between a neighbour from their old apartment building and a florist's assistant who didn't know my name. No one noticed the lace handkerchief in my lap, the same one Melissa once wrapped around her bouquet when she played wedding in our backyard. She was 5 then, and back then, I was her world. Now, I was an extra, a shadow standing politely at the edge of her new life. The ceremony passed, vows were said, everyone cried except me, because I'd run out of tears months ago, when she stopped answering my calls and started sending polite group texts instead. At the reception, I watched as strangers gave speeches about how Melissa always knew what she wanted. I nearly laughed, because what Melissa once wanted was to grow up to be like me. But there I was, a mother silenced at her daughter's wedding. I gathered my coat quietly, my purple shawl slipping slightly as I stood up from the unassigned table at the back. I didn't expect anyone to notice I was leaving until I heard, "Wait, don't go." It was Daniel, her husband. His voice cracked. He looked like someone carrying a weight too heavy for tuxedo shoulders. And then he said something that no one, not even Melissa, had dared to say. "She didn't let you speak, but if I could go back, I would have handed you the mic myself." And in his eyes were tears, not of shame, but something closer to apology. That night, I didn't speak at my daughter's wedding, but I heard the truth. And maybe that was louder than anything I could have said. I remember the first chair she ever called hers. It was plastic, red, and just her size. She used to drag it across the kitchen floor, plop it beside me at the counter and say, "We're cooking together, Mummy." That chair stayed with us through everything. Moves, birthdays, even the week her father left. When Melissa was 7, I sold my engagement ring to pay for a bunk bed so she could finally have a big girl room. When she was 12, I skipped meals for 3 weeks to afford her piano recital dress, the one with the lavender ribbon she insisted made her look like a song. Back then, I wasn't just her mother. I was her safety net, her cheerleader, her audience of one. So when the wedding coordinator asked if I'd like to sit near the front, I smiled and said, "I'll sit wherever she wants me." And Melissa had me seated at a round table in the corner next to a man named Ted, who used to dog-sit their golden doodle. I don't think she meant it as cruelty. She's meticulous, efficient. Everything in her life now is neat and curated, including, apparently, where her mother should be placed. I sat there quietly, watching the slideshow of her childhood flash across the reception wall, every picture carefully chosen. Melissa with her father on a beach trip, Melissa graduating college, Melissa holding Sophie as a newborn. None of them had me in it. It felt like someone had quietly erased me from the album, frame by frame, and I sat there with my lace handkerchief, still folded, in my lap. A woman next to me whispered, "Aren't you the bride's mother?" I nodded. She tilted her head. "She's lucky to have you here." I smiled, but my mouth didn't quite believe it. That chair, that silent chair in the back. It wasn't plastic and red anymore. It was white linen, gold-trimmed, elegant. But it was still the seat where Melissa had placed me, and for the first time, I realised this wasn't a mistake. It was a message. I should have noticed the shift sooner. It didn't happen all at once. There wasn't a fight or a slammed door or even an accusation, just little edits. At first, it was simple things. Melissa stopped calling me on Sunday mornings, said Daniel liked slow starts to the weekend. Then came the change in her voice, Shorter sentences, clipped tones, more "we've already decided" and less "what do you think, Mom?" She wasn't cruel, just calibrated, like everything in her life had to pass through a filter now, and apparently I no longer passed. When they got engaged, I thought maybe things would open up again. Weddings are a time for mothers and daughters, right? I offered to help with the dress. She said, "Emily's mom is taking care of that." I offered to bake her favourite almond cake for the engagement dinner. We're going gluten-free now. I even asked if I could help address the invitations. Melissa looked up from her laptop and said, "Everything's digital, Mum. We don't need envelopes." So I bought a new dress, had my hair done, practiced a small toast in case someone handed me a microphone, but no one did. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, every conversation felt like I was walking on wet stones, unsure where to step, always one slip away from being labelled too much. Then came the text. Not a call, not a conversation, just a text. "Hey, just wanted to let you know we've decided to keep the speeches limited, so no parent toasts. Hope that's okay. Love you." I stared at the screen for nearly an hour. Hope that's okay. That sentence rang louder than any no I'd ever heard. I typed and retyped a response. Finally, I wrote, "Of course. Can't wait to see you walk down the aisle. I'll be right there." And I meant it, even if I wasn't sure where there was anymore. The music had faded into its third playlist. Guests were full, tired, and tipsy, their laughter echoing across the hall like bubbles about to burst. I sat alone for most of the evening. A few people nodded politely. One elderly man asked if I was from the groom's side. I said no. He smiled anyway. "Well, you look proud." I didn't correct him. The speeches were over. Emily's mother, Marcia, told a long story about Melissa's grit and how she fit into Daniel's family instantly. She even joked, "We've adopted her so thoroughly, we might just forget she wasn't born one of us." The room laughed. I didn't. There was no mention of Melissa's childhood, no memory of her getting braces, falling off the monkey bars, crying on prom night because her dress zipper broke. All of those stories belonged to me. And yet, in this version of the evening, I wasn't even footnote material. Around 10:30, I stood up to leave. I gathered my wrap, folded the handkerchief back into my purse, and made my way to the side exit quietly, like an extra slipping out between scenes. I'd nearly made it to the door when I heard someone say softly, "Please." "Wait." I turned. Daniel stood there, his bow tie loosened, jacket off, shoulders slouched in a way they hadn't been earlier, his eyes softer than I'd ever seen. "I didn't know," he said. I blinked. "Didn't know what?" "That she asked you not to speak, or that you weren't in any of the photos." I said nothing. Because what do you say to a man who just realised your absence was intentional? Daniel took a shaky breath. "Melissa's been different since her dad got sick last year. She started building this perfect version of the world, one she could control." He hesitated, and I didn't stop her. There it was, the whisper of guilt. A quiet sentence that carried more apology than all the wedding vows combined. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small square, a printed photo. Melissa, age 6, sitting on my lap, icing smeared across both our cheeks, laughing like fools on her birthday. "She didn't put this one in the slideshow," he said. "I found it on her old phone. She looked at it for a long time, then deleted it." He handed it to me. I didn't cry, but something in me broke open, soft and slow, like frost melting from a window. "I just thought you should have it," he whispered. He turned back for a brief second. Not all the way, just enough to let his voice carry over his shoulder. "You didn't deserve to be edited out." That's all he said. 7 words. Simple, flat, final. But they landed with the weight of a decade. because up until that point, I'd convinced myself this erasure was maybe deserved. Maybe I'd been too protective, too present, too everything. Mothers can love loudly, and sometimes the world tells us that's wrong, that we should shrink, smile, and slip quietly into the background once our children grow. But hearing him say it, Daniel, the man Melissa chose, hearing him see what had been done, even if too late, it felt like an undoing. Not of the wedding, not of the table in the corner, but of the quiet shame I'd been carrying in my chest since the day she said, "No speeches, Mom." I walked back to my car under string lights that were still glowing like fairy tales. No one believed anymore. The lot was mostly empty. The night had cooled, and in that silence, I sat for a long while. I held the photo in one hand, the handkerchief in the other, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel something other than disappointment, because regret is its own kind of love, a twisted, late-coming kind. But it still means the person remembers you were there. The next morning, I didn't expect company. I'd planned on silence, just me, a lukewarm cup of tea, and the sound of an email inbox that hadn't pinged in days. But at 9:07 a.m, the doorbell rang. I didn't move at first. Nobody rang my bell anymore. The mailman knocked once if something needed a signature, but a ring. That meant intention. That meant someone meant to come here. I opened the door slowly, half expecting a neighbour, maybe someone selling solar panels, but it was him, Daniel, again. He looked like he hadn't slept, hair damp from a quick shower, tie gone, the same formal shoes from last night, now scuffed at the toes. "I know I'm intruding," he said quickly. "I won't stay long." I blinked. "Is everything okay?" He nodded, but then shook his head. "I told Melissa you deserved better," he said quietly. She didn't respond, just stared at me. He looked past me, towards the living room, as if remembering something he hadn't meant to carry. I wanted to drop something off. From a manila envelope, he pulled out a folded sheet of stationery. "I found this in her planner," he said. "It was never sent." It was a letter, addressed to me, Melissa's handwriting. "Mum, I know you probably think I've forgotten everything you did. I haven't. I just didn't know how to be both a daughter and a grown woman with my own family. Sometimes I feel like you gave so much I didn't know what was mine. That's not your fault. I'm still learning. Love, M." I sat down, my knees buckled more from recognition than shock. Daniel waited silently while I read, then said, "She wrote it after Sophie was born. I think she meant to give it to you then." He exhaled slowly. "She's scared. She hides it behind the planning, the control. But she does love you." I nodded, because I knew it was true, even if it came hidden in envelopes that never got sent. Daniel left the album on my kitchen table, still wrapped in clear plastic, still bearing the label, "The Thomas Wedding, Final Edit," and a tiny note, "Rush order, deliver by Tuesday." Tuesday, 3 days before the wedding. I stared at it for a long while, not because I was scared of what was inside, but because it meant something had been prepared for permanence, without me. My hands trembled slightly as I peeled away the wrap. The scent of new paper, of freshly pressed print, filled the room. It was strange how grief can smell like packaging glue. The first few pages were obvious. Venue shots, flower arrangements, name cards. Then, the engagement photos. Melissa and Daniel under a willow tree, fingers intertwined, her head against his shoulder. But it wasn't until page 6 that I stopped breathing. There it was, me, in the photo. Not recent, it was from 5 years ago. Me and Melissa sitting on the front porch of her old apartment, both barefoot, laughing, her hand on my knee, my head tilted toward her like I was listening to something that only mothers get to hear. And under the photo, a tiny caption in cursive. before everything changed. That's when my throat tightened, because in that caption, I heard her voice. Not the one from the bridal suite or the polished rehearsal dinner, but the old one. The one that used to whisper, "Mum, can you stay a little longer?" The one that cried after breakups and sent pictures of her morning coffee just because. This album wasn't meant to be shown. At least, not to me. That photo hadn't made the wedding slideshow. That caption hadn't echoed across the speakers. And yet, here it was, waiting in my kitchen. And just as I was closing the cover, something fluttered out. A sticky note, soft yellow, faded ink. It read, "Keep this in the back, just for me." I paused, hands resting on the table, eyes stinging. Because even in her silence, even in her boundary-building, speech-banning, photo-editing self, there was still a thread connecting us. Frayed? Yes, but not severed. The call came 5 days later, right when I'd settled into the kind of quiet only late afternoon shadows can bring. The phone buzzed once, then again. Melissa. Mobile. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, because her name on my caller ID hadn't appeared in weeks, not even during the final wedding prep. She'd communicated through Daniel, or texts, or silence. I picked up. "Hi," I said softly. She didn't say anything at first, just breathed, shaky, uneven, unfiltered. Then, "Mum, I'm sorry." I closed my eyes. Her voice didn't sound like the bride I saw in white chiffon. It sounded younger, like a child who'd just broken something they weren't supposed to touch. "What happened?" I asked. She hesitated. "I was putting away the last of the cards, the wedding stuff, and I found the album order receipt. I realised I never gave it to you." I looked across the kitchen. The album still sat there, closed now, but not forgotten. "I saw the note," I said, "and the photo." There was a long pause, and then, "I don't know why I left it out. I think I didn't want people to see how messy I was before, how much I needed you." Those words, "needed you," they landed gentler than I expected, like the sound of fabric folding in an empty room. "I didn't need a speech," she said quietly. "I needed you to tell me I was still allowed to love you, without everyone watching." I swallowed hard, because I understood now. The ban wasn't just about control, it was about fear. Fear that being too close to me would expose the version of herself she'd buried in adulthood. "I never stopped being proud of you," I told her, "even when I didn't recognise the way you loved me." She didn't respond right away. Then she whispered, "I still have your bracelet. That old silver one. The one I gave her at 17. She hadn't worn it in years. After she mentioned the bracelet, the line went quiet again. Not dropped, not ended, just heavy. "I found your letter," I said softly. "The one Daniel gave me." I heard a soft inhale. "I wrote that right after Sophie was born," she replied. "I meant to give it to you before Mother's Day that year, but I kept rewriting it. I was afraid if I gave it to you, it would feel like I owed you." That word "owed" made something in my stomach twist. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was trying to grow, to become her own person. But in doing so, she'd buried every version of us that wasn't perfectly composed. "You don't owe me," I said. "You never did." "I know," she whispered, "but I didn't." The pause that followed wasn't silence, it was grief. Grief for the things we both left unsaid, for the years where mothering became a negotiation instead of a comfort. And then she said it, barely audible, but enough. "I didn't want you speaking at the wedding, because I was scared you'd say something true." Those words sliced deeper than I expected, not because they were cruel, but because they were honest. "I thought if I controlled the script," she continued, "then nothing could go wrong, that I wouldn't cry, that no one would see how close I'd come to losing you. I sat down hard into the kitchen chair, because suddenly everything made sense. Not being in the slideshow, not giving a toast, not even sitting near the front, it wasn't punishment, it was self-protection. Daniel had told me she was scared, but he hadn't said of what. Now I knew. "Mum, what would you have said?" Her voice had softened, almost shy, like she wasn't just asking what I would have said, but what I still could. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked slowly to the drawer near the stove, pulled out a notepad I hadn't touched in months, the kind with watercolour flowers on the top border and faint lines across the page, and I sat down. "If I had spoken," I said gently, "I would have told them this." I cleared my throat. "I would have told them how you were born on a thunderstorm night, and how you hated sleeping alone until you were 7, how you made me a Mother's Day card out of coffee filters and red yarn, and how, when your heart got broken in high school, you came into my room and curled up like you were 5 again. I would have told them you're not perfect, but you're brave, and that's always been enough. I would have said I was proud of the woman you've become, not in spite of me, but because of the space we've learned to give each other." Silence. Then, on the other end of the line, a soft sound, not a sob, just a breath, held too long, and then she said, "I think I needed to hear that more than the guests ever would have." I smiled, tears pooling. "You still can," I whispered. "Every day if you want." She didn't say anything, but I could feel something in her softening, and then the doorbell rang. I froze. She hesitated too. "Wait, was that—" I opened the door. There, on my porch, stood Daniel, in his hands, the same bouquet Melissa had carried down the aisle, soft peach roses, white ranunculus, eucalyptus tucked between the petals. He nodded once. She asked me to bring these. That moment, quiet, simple was the soft disruption. It didn't shout, but it rebalanced everything. It wasn't just a gesture, it was permission from her. A way to say, "You may not have spoken that night, but I hear you now. She found something else she wants you to have," Daniel said, handing me the envelope. It was thick, cream-coloured, and on the front, in Melissa's handwriting, it simply said, "For what you weren't allowed to say." My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a printed photo, me holding Melissa as a newborn, still in the hospital gown. My hair was messy, my eyes tired, but I was smiling like the world had just handed me its only treasure. Behind the photo was a folded card. Not one she bought, but one she'd made, like she used to when she was little. Inside, a single sentence was written in dark blue ink. "I know I didn't let you speak that night, but you've never stopped speaking through everything you've done for me." Tears blurred my vision, not because of the words, but because of the timing. She hadn't said this on the phone, hadn't said it at the wedding. She'd said it here in a way I could carry, read, touch and cry over, without anyone watching. Daniel stepped back. "I tried to tell her," he said softly, "but I think she needed to arrive there on her own." I nodded. "That's how healing works," I murmured. "It doesn't like to be scheduled." He chuckled, just barely. Then he paused, as if debating something. "She told me something else before the wedding." I glanced up. "She said if you gave a speech, she was afraid the guests would see how much of her still needed her mother." That line, it wasn't meant to sting, but it did. Not because it was cruel, but because it was still true, even after the ring, even after the bouquet. And then Daniel said the thing that cracked it open. She wasn't protecting herself from embarrassment. She was protecting her identity, the one she'd worked so hard to build without depending on anyone. My phone buzzed. A message from Emily. "Can I stop by for 5 minutes? I think I need to say something. Emily, Melissa's best friend since middle school, the one who had stood next to her at the altar, smiled for every photo, helped plan the entire ceremony, and now she was on my porch. She looked nervous, hair pulled back tight, voice more tentative than usual. "I won't take long," she said. "I just wanted to clarify something about the wedding." I waved her in, surprised. She didn't sit, just held her hands together in front of her like a student giving a confession. "Melissa didn't ban you out of malice," she said quickly. "She was terrified of feeling seen." I didn't speak. I let her go on. "She thought, if you spoke, if the room saw how close you still are, it would take something away from her moment, like she hadn't fully grown up, like people would think she was still leaning on you." "She is still leaning on me," I whispered. "I know," Emily said. "That's what scared her." Then she reached into her purse. She wanted this buried, but I couldn't. She handed me a crumpled piece of paper, folded in fourths. I opened it. It was the speech, my speech, printed, marked with red lines, notes in the margins, all in Melissa's handwriting. "Cut this. It'll make me cry too early. Leave this line in. It's true. Can we move this part to the end? It's beautiful." I stared. "She read it?" I asked. Emily nodded. "Every night for 3 days. She just never figured out how to let it be heard. The weight of it hit me all at once. She had wanted to hear me speak. She just didn't know how to survive it." And then Emily's voice cracked. "I don't have a mum, Mrs. Thomas. That's why I helped her plan everything. But I also told her she'd regret not letting you in. She told me that loving you sometimes feels like loving a mirror she's afraid to look into." That line broke me, because it wasn't cruel. It was brutally, honestly, human. Melissa wasn't rejecting me. She was still building the strength to fully face me. She was wearing the bracelet, the same one Melissa had worn since college, thin rose gold, with a pale green stone in the middle. It had belonged to my mother, and when Melissa turned 21, I passed it down. "Why are you wearing that?" I asked, more surprised than angry. Emily looked down, then slipped it off gently. "She asked me to give it to you after the wedding." She placed it in my palm. It felt warm, like it had been carrying more than just weight. I turned it over, and for the first time in years, noticed the underside. There was a small engraving. I had it added back when Melissa was in high school. "You're not lost. You're becoming." Tears prickled instantly. Emily leaned in, voice low. She said, "The day you gave it to her was the day she started believing she could leave home." I closed my eyes because I remembered that day. Her trembling fingers, the hug that lasted longer than expected, the way she whispered, "Does this mean you believe in me?" And I had said, "More than you know." I looked back at Emily, but her face had changed, tighter, more conflicted. "I need to tell you something," she said. She reached into her purse again and pulled out a small sealed envelope, my name on the front, Melissa's writing. "She wrote this the morning of the wedding," Emily said. "She almost gave it to you before the ceremony, but at the last second, she slipped it into my clutch." She said, "Only if she still shows up, only if she smiles anyway." I stared at it, hands trembling again. Emily didn't wait for me to open it. She turned to go, pausing only once at the door. "I think she wanted to know if you still believed in her, even when she didn't act like she deserved it." And then she left. The envelope remained in my hands. I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I reached for the bracelet again. And for the first time since the wedding, I fastened it back around my wrist, But not for her, not for tradition, not for closure, for me, because sometimes the words we don't say out loud are the ones we still carry. In metal, in memory, in silence. I hesitated. We hadn't spoken since the wedding night, since he handed me Melissa's card and said nothing else. But now, it was him calling again at 9:42 p.m. on a Tuesday. "Hello?" I answered, voice cautious. He sounded softer, not like someone making a polite call, but someone who'd been sitting with something heavy. "I'm sorry for the late call," he said quietly. I needed to tell you something I didn't say that night." I leaned back into the chair, the lights in my living room dim, the soft tick of the hallway clock behind me. "Go on," I whispered. There was a pause, long enough that I thought he might hang up. Then she cried in the dressing room. Before the ceremony, I sat upright. She said she felt like a fraud, like she built this entire life on the condition she'd never need you again. And suddenly, you were there looking at her like she was still 5. I didn't interrupt, because I remembered that look. I had looked at her like that. Not to belittle her, but because I remembered all of her, not just the bride, but the girl who once collected dandelions for me on Tuesdays like it was a ritual. Daniel's voice grew rougher. "She told me she thought if you spoke, she'd lose the version of herself she'd been trying to protect." Then silence. No excuses, no tidy moral. Just breathe. And then, but later, when you still smiled, even when she gave you nothing, she said, "I didn't deserve that." That's when I knew Daniel had called because he couldn't hold it anymore either. "She asked me not to say anything," he added, "but I watched you walk out of that reception, and I realised not saying something isn't loyalty, it's cowardice." There it was. Not just Melissa's silence, but his, broken by regret. I walked to the kitchen counter. The envelope sat like it had weight beyond paper. My name written in her slightly slanted cursive had a soft smudge near the end of the S, like someone had hesitated. I opened it slowly. Not like a reader, like a mother holding breath. "Mom, if you're holding this, it means you came anyway. It means you smiled anyway. It means you loved me, even when I made it hardest." I sat down. "I didn't ask you to speak because I was afraid. Not of your voice, but of what it reflected. You were always my echo saying the things I felt too raw to say out loud. When you hug me, I feel 5 again. And sometimes that terrified me." I gripped the edge of the chair. Then came the line, the one that broke me without drama, the line she'd written in blue ink added by hand below the typed text. "You raised me to speak with grace, and I silenced your own." That was it. That was the echo. The regret she couldn't say face to face, but folded into the margins, between typed lines and ink smears, like someone learning to be brave, slowly. And just below that, taped to the bottom of the page, was a pressed flower, a tiny dandelion, flat, faded, still intact. I smiled, tears already sliding down. When she was 5, every Tuesday after daycare, she'd pluck one from the lawn and say, "This one's for your tea, Mama." It had been our ritual, and I thought she'd forgotten. But there it was, a small, silent dandelion, a ghost of a Tuesday pinned to an apology. I opened the door. It was Daniel. No umbrella, suit jacket half-buttoned, and in his hands, Melissa's bouquet, white peonies, 2 small sprigs of lavender, and a single, slightly wilted dandelion. He didn't say a word, just held it out. I looked at him, confused, raw, tired. "She left it in the hotel room," he finally said. "Said if I thought you'd understand, to give it to you quietly." He placed it gently into my hands, and something about the weight of it, not heavy, but purposeful, made me feel like I was holding more than flowers. She said to tell you she was sorry she couldn't say the words, Daniel continued, but she remembered Tuesdays. That's all he said. That one sentence, enough. Because I remembered too, the flowers, the teacups, the clumsy glue stick she used to tape dandelions to her handmade cards. I nodded. No need for more. Daniel hesitated, then looked back over his shoulder toward his car. She sat there for 10 minutes before the ceremony, holding this bouquet, whispering to herself. I couldn't hear what she said, but she wasn't rehearsing vows. I looked down at the bouquet. Tucked among the peonies was a folded slip of paper, not a note, just a printed line in tiny serif font. Not all love is spoken aloud. Some is just remembered. No signature, no flourish, but I knew it was hers. I took a breath and brought the flowers inside, placing them on the kitchen table beside the bracelet, the letter, and the teacup with a tiny chip on the rim. This wasn't a performance, not forgiveness, not resolution, just a laying down of symbols, like placing old pieces of a puzzle on the table, to say, we were here, we tried, we loved imperfectly and sometimes too late. That morning, I brewed tea with the bouquet still resting on the kitchen table. As I reached to straighten the vase, I noticed a folded sheet of paper underneath. It was creased 3 ways and slightly wrinkled, as if someone had clutched it in a moment of doubt. I opened it carefully. Melissa Ann Carter, wedding speech draft number 4, typed in bold across the top. The document had edits all over lines crossed out, notes scribbled in the margins. At one point, she'd written in purple ink, "Say this only if I'm brave enough." And there it was, right in the middle of the page, a single line untouched, uncrossed, untouched by hesitation. There are women who shape you from the inside out. My mother is one of them. No build-up, no dramatic arc, just that. Then 3 dots. Below it, the next line had been slashed with a red pen. Whatever came after, she had decided the moment was too much. I sat with it. That sentence, the one she never said, not at the altar, not in the speeches, not in person, but she'd typed it, marked it, and tucked it beneath a vase of flowers on my kitchen table. Why? Maybe because she knew I'd find it. Maybe because she couldn't say it with her voice but still wanted me to hear it, somehow. That line, that quiet truth, landed harder than any public apology ever could. I folded the paper slowly and looked outside. Daniel's car was gone. The house was silent. But something in me, some small weathered part, felt seen. Not fully healed, not even close, but no longer invisible. We sat on the park bench under the elm tree, the one with low-hanging branches Ellie liked to hide under. She had a juice box. I had lukewarm tea in a thermos. The sun had dipped just low enough to cast long shadows across the grass, and I thought we were done talking for the day until she turned to me. "Grandma? Mommy said you used to call her your Tuesday flower." I blinked. Was that real? My throat caught. I hadn't spoken those words out loud in years. Every Tuesday, back when Melissa was 7 or 8, I'd leave a small note in her lunchbox. "Grow strong, my Tuesday flower." Sometimes with a doodle of a daisy, sometimes with nothing but a heart. It had started after her first bad week at school. Tuesdays were her rough days, PE, spelling. A teacher who never smiled, so I gave her something soft to carry, something steady. "Yes, Ellie," I said slowly, looking at her small hands gripping the box. It was real, very real. She beamed, then asked, "What kind of flower was she?" I smiled gently. A dandelion, I think, one that never asked for attention but still showed up anyway, through cracks in the sidewalk, in between all the noise. Ellie leaned her head against my arm, quiet. Then, after a pause, she whispered, "I think you're my Friday flower." It knocked the wind out of me. I didn't know what it meant exactly. Maybe it didn't need to mean anything precise. Just that in her little world, in her own rhythm of days and soft truths, I had become something rooted, something remembered. It was the kind of sentence Melissa might have written and never said. And in that moment, through Ellie's voice, it felt like Melissa had said it after all, not in a speech, not in a letter, but passed down tenderly through the voice of her daughter. That night, I opened the cedar box at the foot of my bed. It still smelled faintly of lavender and dust, the quiet kind of dust that collects when a life pauses without permission. Inside were things I hadn't touched in years: Melissa's baby hospital bracelet, a tiny red mitten with a tear in the palm, a photo of my own mother, her handwriting faded on the back, "Be more than they expect, but less than they can break." I added 2 more things to the box now: her draft wedding speech, folded neatly this time, and Ellie's drawing from the park. Me, with flowers in my hair, labelled Friday Flower. Then I took out a soft-bound journal I hadn't opened in decades, page after page of things I never said out loud, and on the newest, blank page, I wrote a sentence. There are women who shape you from the inside out, and sometimes they're not the ones we celebrate, but the ones who never stopped showing up. It was a remix of what Melissa had tried to write, but this one came from me. From the silence I had sat in, from the weddings I hadn't spoken at, from the lunchboxes, the night shifts, the doctor's appointments no one remembered. That sentence, it didn't need a stage. It had lived in my actions, but now it would live in words too. I closed the journal, slipped the pen back into the spine, and placed it in the box. Then I paused because I heard something. Melissa's voice, not out loud, but on the voicemail I'd ignored the day after the wedding. My phone had lit up with her name, but I'd let it go to voicemail. I hadn't had the heart. But now I opened the message. "Hi, Mum. I don't know if you'll ever hear this, but I found the speech again. And Ellie asked about the Tuesday flower. I think I should have let you talk. I think I needed to hear it too." Just that. No apology, no fireworks, but the chime of a familiar sentence, spoken from her voice, echoed now in mine. And somewhere in the spaces between the lines, I felt us both, learning how to begin again. The next morning, I walked up to Melissa's porch just after sunrise. I didn't knock. I didn't leave a note. I just placed the small cedar box beside the welcome mat. The same box that had held fragments of our history, now carrying the journal, the drawing, and a single flower from my garden. Not a daisy, not a rose, just a wild dandelion yellow, stubborn, beautiful. I tied it with a ribbon, then turned and walked back to my car. Later that week, I got a photo from Melissa. It was Ellie, holding the box in her lap. The journal was open on the kitchen table, and on the back of the page where I'd written my sentence, Ellie had drawn 3 stick figures, 1 tall, 1 medium, 1 small, all holding hands beneath a tree with bright yellow petals. Underneath, in a wobbly scrawl, Mommy's Tuesday flower, Grandma's Friday flower, me, all the days. That was it. No speeches, no toasts, just the quiet passing of a truth from one heart to another to the next. And as I sat by my window, hands wrapped around a warm mug, I realised we don't always get the apology, or the stage, or the seat near the front, but sometimes, if we keep showing up, we become the soil they grow from, the ones who shape quietly, who endure, who love anyway. If you've ever poured your whole life into others and wondered who you are when they no longer need you, this story is for you. You're not invisible. You're not replaceable. You're still here. And that matters more than you know.